Agincourt, the battle won by farmers with sticks. An English army, starving, sick and outnumbered by as much as 5-1, faced annihilation in a muddy French field. Most of them weren't even trained soldiers, they were archers pulled from English farms, armed with longbows that took years of physical conditioning just to draw. By the end of the day, thousands of French knights, the most heavily armored, expensively trained soldiers in Europe, were dead or captured. The English lost a few hundred men. By October of 1415, King Henry V of England had spent weeks on a military campaign through northern France that had gone considerably worse than planned. Having captured the port town of Harfleur after a siege that took far longer than anticipated, Henry's army had been severely depleted by dysentery and other disease, and rather than continuing his original campaign objectives, Henry made the decision to march his remaining forces toward English-held Calais, a decision that placed his exhausted, diminished army directly in the path of a considerably larger French force determined to intercept and destroy them before they could reach safety. By the time the two armies met near the village of Agincourt on October 25, 1415, Henry's forces had been reduced through disease, exhaustion, and weeks of difficult marching to somewhere between 6,000 and 9,000 men, a significant portion of whom were longbow archers rather than heavily armored knights or men-at-arms, facing a French force that most historians estimate at somewhere between 12,000 and 36,000 soldiers, a genuinely wide range reflecting the significant uncertainty surrounding medieval battle records, but one that, even at the more conservative end of historical estimates, represented a substantial numerical advantage for the French forces. The specific tactical and environmental circumstances of the battlefield itself proved genuinely decisive to the battle's ultimate outcome. Recent heavy rainfall had transformed the recently ploughed field between the two armies into a genuinely treacherous expanse of thick, clinging mud, conditions that would prove catastrophically disadvantageous for the heavily armored French knights and men-at-arms whose full-plate armor, while providing considerable protection, also weighed somewhere between 50 and 70 pounds, a burden that became genuinely exhausting and severely limiting to mobility. Once soldiers were forced to advance across deep, waterlogged mud rather than firm, dry ground, Henry positioned his forces strategically within a relatively narrow section of the battlefield, flanked on both sides by dense woodland that significantly restricted the French army's ability to fully deploy their substantial numerical advantage, forcing the advancing French forces into an increasingly compressed, congested formation as they moved forward. A tactical positioning that historians studying the battle consider genuinely crucial to the eventual outcome, since it prevented France's larger army from ever being able to fully envelop or outflank the considerably smaller English force. The battle's decisive tactical element proved to be England's longbow archers, positioned along the flanks of Henry's formation and equipped with the longbow, a weapon requiring years of sustained physical training and conditioning to use effectively, since drawing a war-quality longbow required genuinely substantial physical strength, developed specifically through years of dedicated practice, meaning England's archer corps represented not merely armed peasants, but genuinely skilled specialists whose specific physical capabilities had been cultivated over years, often beginning in childhood, through England's broader cultural and legal emphasis on archery practice among its general population. As the French forces began their advance across the muddy field, English archers unleashed devastating volleys of arrows, and while medieval plate armor could often deflect direct arrow strikes, the sheer volume and sustained duration of English archery fire, combined with the genuinely exhausting effort required for heavily armored French soldiers to advance through deep mud while under constant projectile fire, began inflicting serious casualties and, more significantly, causing genuine chaos and disorganization within the advancing French formation well before the two forces even made direct physical contact. When French forces finally reached the English line, exhausted from their difficult advance through mud while wearing heavy armor, and having suffered significant casualties and disorganization from sustained archery fire, they found themselves engaging an English force that, despite being considerably outnumbered, proved able to fight with genuine tactical cohesion, against an increasingly disorganized, exhausted, and severely compressed French formation. A battle that, according to numerous historical accounts, saw many French soldiers actually trampled or suffocated in the crush of their own compressed, chaotic formation rather than dying purely from direct combat wounds, a genuinely gruesome consequence of the battlefield's specific terrain and tactical circumstances. What made the battle's outcome genuinely historically remarkable was the specific role England's archers played once the initial arrow volleys had been exhausted, since historical accounts describe English archers, rather than remaining purely in a supporting projectile role, actually joining the direct melee combat once French forces reached the English line, using hand weapons, and in several documented accounts simply overwhelming exhausted, mud-mired French knights through sheer numbers and mobility advantage, since lightly equipped archers could move through the thick mud considerably more effectively than French soldiers burdened by full-plate armor. The resulting casualties proved genuinely, dramatically lopsided. Historical estimates suggest French casualties, encompassing both those killed during the battle and the substantial additional numbers who died from suffocation or trampling within the chaotic, compressed formation, likely exceeded several thousand men, including a significant proportion of France's senior nobility and military leadership, while English casualties are generally estimated at only a few hundred men, a genuinely extraordinary disparity that transformed Agincourt into one of history's most frequently studied examples of how terrain, tactical positioning, and specialized weaponry could overcome even substantial numerical disadvantage. The battle produced one additional, genuinely controversial historical episode that has remained a subject of significant historical debate ever since. As the battle progressed, Henry, receiving reports suggesting a potential renewed French attack was forming, and facing the genuine practical challenge of managing an unexpectedly large number of French prisoners with his own severely limited remaining forces, ordered the execution of a substantial number of French prisoners already captured during the battle. A decision that, while defensible from a purely tactical standpoint given the genuine risk his depleted forces faced if prisoners had been freed or had risen against their captors during a renewed assault, has nonetheless remained a genuinely significant point of historical and ethical controversy, representing a stark departure from the chivalric conventions of the era regarding the treatment of captured noble prisoners. Henry's victory at Agincourt, achieved against such significant numerical disadvantage, produced genuinely substantial strategic and political consequences extending well beyond the battle's immediate tactical outcome, significantly strengthening England's broader negotiating position within the ongoing Hundred Years' War and contributing directly to Henry's subsequent diplomatic successes, including the eventual Treaty of Troyes, which formally recognized Henry as heir to the French throne itself, a political outcome that, while ultimately proving temporary given Henry's own early death and the war's eventual, considerably different final resolution decades later, represented a genuinely remarkable diplomatic achievement directly traceable to the specific military credibility Henry's forces had established at Agincourt. What makes Agincourt endure as one of history's most extensively studied military engagements isn't simply the dramatic scale of England's numerical disadvantage, remarkable as that disparity genuinely remains, but the specific combination of tactical positioning, environmental circumstance, and specialized weaponry that allowed a smaller, exhausted, disease-weakened force to overcome what should have been, by any conventional military calculation, an overwhelming and likely decisive French advantage, a battle whose specific tactical lessons regarding terrain, troop positioning, and the genuine strategic value of specialized, well-trained infantry continued influencing military thinking for centuries following the actual engagement itself. If stories like this, where farmers with longbows outfought Europe's most expensively trained knights through nothing more than mud, positioning, and years of practiced skill, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to the grave details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.